So we welcome our presenter for today's session. She's the person of Madam Sarah Esegbona-Adeigbe. She has been a registered nurse and midwife for about 25 years. She has worked in the UK and the US and volunteered in Africa. She is passionate about improving the pregnancy outcomes for high-risk women during pregnancy and exploring the cultural needs of women. In addition, she has also published several papers on culture, Black African women and pregnancy, sickle cell anemia, and FGM. She has received the first Zora Pokubam Award to fund her PhD studies and the Unexplored Award for commitment to midwifery practice from the Ethan Midwifery Trust. She's also currently an associate professor in midwifery at the London South Bank University and lead models on public health and midwifery and care of the women and additional needs. Sarah completed a PhD at the University of Hertfordshire, exploring Nigerian women and midwives' perceptions of cultural competency in antenatal care. Let's welcome Sarah Esegbona-Adeigbe for this presentation. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the IDM for this great opportunity to present my PhD study at the Virtual Day of the Midwife. I would first of all like to state my overwhelming appreciation for the support offered by my two PhD supervisors for their expertise and support during my PhD studies. They were actually fantastic. I'd also like to thank the Alumni Midwifery Trust that provided funding for my studies, and I'm grateful for their recognition of the importance of this study and the support provided. I'd also like to thank the mothers and midwives who participated in this study, who gave their precious time to speak to me and share their stories. I'm very, very appreciative of their time, and they were amazing. And then finally, I'd like to thank my midwifery colleagues at London South Bank University for the care and support they gave me during my PhD studies. So I would like to talk to you first about the background to the study, and I call it the shadow of facts. And the facts were that Black women have been at increased risk for maternal mortality since 2000, so more than 2 decades in the UK. Black women currently are almost 3 times more likely to die during pregnancy than women of white ethnicity. And also Black women are twice as likely to have a stillbirth or neonatal mortality. And within the Black woman population, Black African women are one of the high-risk groups. So there was limited light on these dark facts and very limited light at the end of the tunnel. The next slide, please. So the enlightening issues around maternal mortality reports in the UK is that for the mothers who died, there was poor or no engagement with antenatal care. And what they found is that they linked recent migration and ethnicity to poor engagement with antenatal care. And they supposed that maybe there was a link between poor utilization of antenatal care and culture. So in several maternal mortality reports, culture was alluded to, but that's all it was. And there was no specific reason why mothers were not engaging with antenatal care. So obviously this was an issue that needed to be investigated. Next slide, please. So there are numerous studies. When I did a literature review for my PhD, I looked at the study, I looked at the literature, and there are numerous studies on migrant Black African women's pregnancy experiences worldwide, but there's limited studies on their cultural practices. And many studies did not focus on recently migrated Black African mothers and their cultural requirements. And so therefore there was an obvious gap in the evidence. So if we move on to the next slide. So important to understand that what is culture for the study in order to explore the phenomenon effectively. And also it's important to have an understanding of cultural competency, which was required for exploring women's cultural requirements in healthcare. So if you look at the definition from Hellman of culture, it's viewed as a set of guidelines that individuals inherit as members of a particular group, and this influences how the world is viewed emotionally, and it also influences the individual's behaviour in relation to other people and the natural environment. And also this will be applicable to their healthcare environment and their health-seeking behaviour. And then the term cultural competency was first devised by Cross, and it's a set of behaviours and attitudes and policies that come together in the system. And this supports professionals to work effectively in cross-cultural situations with individuals from different cultures. So if we go to the next slide. So I've lost my slides now. So I'm just waiting for my slide to come back up onto the screen. Thank you.
Okay, hello. We've got a frozen screen. Constance, are you still there?
Yeah, hello, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
Constance,
So who have we lost? We've lost Halima and we've lost...
okay.
No, Sarah's still there?
Okay, so then let me share my slide.
Yep,
I'm
Sarah's
back in
still
again.
there.
I was thrown out, but I'm back in again.
Oh, the joys of doing a virtual presentation, hey?
Yes.
Okay, so Constance is going to share her slides and then you can pick up where you left from. Beautiful work.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. And I was really getting to the really interesting part as well.
Oh, Murphy's Law, right? Murphy's Law.
Okay.
Halima, I've made you host again, so you should be good to go.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I got kicked out. Apologies.
I was on slide 6, if that helps. Well, my slide 6, not of your slide 6.
So do you want me to share the slide?
I don't mind
Okay.
taking control. If you give me control, might be easier that way. Okay, I still don't have control, so are you going to need the slides?
You have, I gave you control now.
Okay, let me just see. I can't see where I can pick up the control. I'm sorry.
Okay, at the very top of the screen, Sarah, where you see that Halima is sharing her screen, there's a green button that to the right of that, there should be a little chevron. Click on that and it will say ask for remote access at the very top of the slide screen. You may have to click on the slides and then use your arrow bars to move them forward. It's a bit finicky.
So if you're not able to do that, let me just move the slide for you because of your time. Is that okay, Sarah?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. I'll just click off and stay on this previous slide, please, which I hadn't really addressed. The previous slide, which was a focus on culture. That's it. Thank you. So with this study, the focus was on culture, and I decided to explore the emic insider view of mothers and the etic view outsider view of midwives, which is important in research studies that explore cross-cultural differences. So as previously mentioned, this was a qualitative study on Nigerian mothers and midwife perceptions of cultural competency in antenatal care, and Nigerian mothers, which were featured as a high-risk group in several maternal mortality reports in the UK, were selected as their mothers. And the midwives were any midwives who had current or previous experience of routine antenatal care. So next slide, please. So it's important to talk about cultural competency because this was the conceptual framework for my study and was also used to devise the interview guide. So 2 cultural competency modules were used from Papadopoulos et al. And Complina Bakote, which are both validated cultural competency models for clinical practice. And these studies are, these modules are good because they are relevant to military practice, inclusive, and they had constructs which address the many variances of clinical practice. So cultural awareness, which is an ability to understand and recognize differences and similarities, cultural sensitivity, which was having respect and acceptance for cultural differences and practices, and cultural skill, which is effective communication and assessment of individuals from different cultures. And then cultural knowledge, which states is the most important construct, awareness and cultural desire. So encounters are required to gain this cultural knowledge and develop this skill and sensitivity and awareness. But without the cultural desire, you will not seek out those cultural encounters. So that was important. So these constructs were used to develop the interview guide. Next slide, please. So I wanted flexibility when using a research methodology, and I wanted to use elements from different qualitative methodologies. And so I used a generic qualitative approach because this enabled me to have a deeper understanding of the phenomenon. It also allows research to remain closer to and describe the participants' experiences. I use conventional content analysis to analyze the data an inductive approach, and I can choose the participant's voice. Next slide, please.
Did we lose Sarah?
I'm still here. Now the next slide, please.
So can I move the next slide?
Yes, please.
Go for it, Halima. Sarah, your audio is coming in and out every now and then.
Okay. I'll take off my headphones to see if that helps. The study were 2 hospitals in 2 geographical areas in London, UK. In both of these geographical areas, there was more than a 20% population of Black applicants. And these 2 hospitals were in the top 10 areas for births to African mothers. And because it was an NHS, there were NHS trusts, I had to gain ethical approval from the Health Research Authority UK. Next slide, please. So I used purposeful sampling and approached midwives in the clinical area, and mothers were sourced through the antenatal matron in each hospital. Our first focus groups with midwives, but 4 midwives in the did recruit to set midwives, but to bring them together, and that was the case. As I said, I had current or past experience of routine antenatal care, and the experiences ranged from 2 years to 15+ years, but every midwife had been working in London for 2 years at least. And 3 of the midwives are currently working in community teams and 2 midwives in caseloading teams. And 3 midwives had previous experience of working in community teams. I conducted 15 one-to-one interviews with Nigerian women. The time in the UK was less than 5 years because this was the recommendation evidence from embrace reports, maternity reports that it had to be within the last year, because I wanted to have good recall of the antenatal experiences. There could be a first-time mother, second-time mothers, and primary gravida or multi-gravida. They were all English-speaking mothers because English is the national language in Nigeria and it's used in the education system. There were 14 telephone interviews and 1 face-to-face interview. And again, because of my approach and trying to be culturally sensitive and inclusive, I actually allowed the mothers to choose how they wanted to be interviewed, and this is what they chose. The face-to-face interview was done in the clinic at one of the hospitals. Next slide, please. So
By 10:15, 10:50, I'll finish. Okay.
the 4 things derived from the 2 focus group, go into them in a little more detail in the next few slides. So next slide, please. So theme 1 was around in the midst of cultural ambiguity, and midwives accept or were not aware of cultural differences. This would impact or create a barrier to individualized care, and they were aware of unconscious bias as well and the influence of that on care provision. But stereotype was alluded to in both focus groups, and they found that this was detrimental to women receiving individualized care. And one of the things that came out from the findings, which was quite stark, was midwives stating that there was this misconception of the strong Black woman midwife said there tends to be Black and pregnant in the UK. So if we go into the next slide, please. Theme 2 for the midwives was about creating a space for sharing a cultural understanding. And I just want to touch on the things that they really raised quite brought a lot of focus was about the questioning, that they used questioning to elicit information from mothers about their culture. And both focus groups said that this was quite important because it allowed them to explore any beliefs and values they had about pregnancy. And as midwife said, making the opportunity to ask specific questions, and if there's something she wants done in a specific way, that will help me to establish what her cultural likes are, to be able to sort of facilitate her own needs and choices. Midwives did debate about learning about women's culture could lead to an increase in cultural knowledge, but this was only possible if there was time allowed to do this. And so the lack of time in both focus groups was highlighted. It was a very common theme, and that they felt that the requirement of cultural knowledge was impacted by this. So next slide, please. Midwives also talked about preserving culture and individuality, and basically in the midwives discussions, cultural sensitivity was revealed because they were actively engaged in meeting women's needs, and midwives did try to support women's cultural values, and they tried to organise care to meet their expectations and preserve their culture. But often, and this is in both focus groups, there were conflicts with the professional role of the midwife and organizational constraints. And as midwife once said, so when they say something that we could possibly incorporate or something we couldn't possibly incorporate, discuss with them why we can't do this or why it's going to be difficult to do this or that. So that was one of the things that came up from this thing. That there was a conflict with organizational policy with the women's culture, and also there might be conflict with evidence-based practice and the women's culture. And you have to remember as well that the midwife has her own personal culture as well, and that comes into the mix as well. So we go on to the next slide, please. And the last thing for the midwives was around the cultural hesitancy and impediments. And midwives talked about the several challenges in trying to provide culturally sensitive care. Both focus groups said that the NHS was under pressure and antenatal care provision was bound by financial constraints and workforce limitations. And it was mentioned several times around the inequalities in antenatal care for women. And as one midwife said, midwife for qualified 4 years, it's like the structure of how we work needs to improve a lot more, especially with appointment times for many of our general community. So I think that disparity needs to be fixed. And this is basically around not all women having this continuity of care, which was actually what this midwife was able to do with some women, but she recognized that other women in the hospital want to offer this type of care. And then we needed to think about family gatekeepers as well. Midwives talked about maybe the family and the partners of the woman, preventing the woman from accessing services that they need, and lack of interpretation services, particularly in the woman's dialect, wasn't always available, or maybe want to have a male interpreter. And also there was a lot of requests for male healthcare professionals not being met, because obviously, as one midwife said, in their trust, 90% of the obstetricians are male, and so therefore trying to source a female obstetrician was actually impossible, which meant that the woman's care could be compromised. So if you go into the next slide, please. So talking about the themes from the Nigerian mothers, the first theme was around overlooking culture during pregnancy care. And again, this was another stark finding that the woman said that the culture wasn't identified during antenatal care at the booking appointment or through subsequent antenatal appointments. It wasn't alluded to much apart from the practice to ask them, where are you from? That was it really. And then theme 2 is that the mothers discussed that sharing cultural practices was not essential because they had relocated to the UK and that was more of a priority. And as Top Hill was having her first baby, said, because I'm not in Nigeria again, you understand what I'm saying, there was no need to discuss my culture. And mothers did adhere to cultural practices based on how easy it was achievable during the antenatal care. And some practices were followed or valued, but some practices were hidden from the midwives. And also it was disclosed by a few mothers that in Nigeria, pregnancy is not really discussed outside of those close family and friends. And so therefore, sharing intimate cultural practices around pregnancy was something that they wouldn't do unless they really knew the midwife. And so that was interesting to find. Next slide, please. Now, theme 3 was around cultural expectations of antenatal care. So mothers did have different expectations. And the long waiting times was brought out several times. And also the difficulties in accessing maternity care was brought up by a few mothers, because in the UK, you have to go through a referral system. But in Nigeria, some mothers said that they could just walk into facilities and be seen by a midwife, and they could access information directly from doctors or pharmacists if they needed information around their pregnancy. 6 of the mothers had delivered babies in Nigeria, and 6 mothers were already pregnant when they arrived in Nigeria. So they had experiences of both contexts. And then theme 4 was around the ability to navigate pregnancy within 2 cultures. And the mothers said that the midwives didn't really discuss with them how they adapted to living in the UK. And some of them thought that would have been really useful, particularly the mothers who had, having their first baby in the UK and only had been in the UK for less than 1 year. And some mothers accepted these difficulties as being as part of being a migrant, and learning to adapt was something that they thought they just had to get on with. But they did find it difficult. So going on to themes 5 and 6, theme 5, cultural information needs were discussed, and some mothers said that in between appointments they had to source information from the internet. A lot of mothers did call family and friends, but these family and friends were back home in Nigeria, and so therefore the information given to them was in a different context. And also some of them would contact healthcare professionals in Nigeria as well. And so we needed to think about, was that information the same information that would have been given to them in the UK? All of the mothers were never offered antenatal classes, and a lot of them were quite upset about that. And one mother who was having her first baby lamented that she didn't have a community to share her pregnancy with. And she stated that she had been looking so forward to having antenatal classes in the UK because in Nigeria, women, they sing and dance together during antenatal classes, and it was a real community, and she missed that opportunity. So mothers were asked about the importance of midwife having cultural knowledge, and so the essence of care versus cultural knowledge and skill. And within that theme, mothers expressed that they did not believe it was important for the midwife to have some knowledge of their culture. They felt that it was important for the midwife to be kind and caring rather than to have cultural knowledge. But they felt that if they had taken care of someone from Nigeria, the midwife, that would have been useful, particularly for the mothers who were having their first baby. For one mother who was diagnosed with gestational diabetes, she said she was given dietary advice that she didn't understand. She was told to eat broccoli, which is a green vegetable that we eat in the UK, and she said she would struggle to find that information and find out where this broccoli could be sourced. Whereas another mother who had been given dietary advice by a Nigerian midwife, and she said that she was able to follow it quite clearly because the dietary advice was culturally specific. Next slide, please. So the last 2 themes was around culturally embraced communications, and basically the mothers really did appreciate the midwives' communication with them. They thought it was very respectful. They gave their consent for everything, and they found it was a joy and there was no issues. But some mothers did talk about continuity of care being broken because they saw different midwives at every antenatal appointment, and only about 3 of the mothers had continuity of care through the antenatal appointments. One of the mothers, well, a few of the mothers actually talked about the midwives not speaking normal English, saying that because all these mothers spoke English. I mean, all of them were mostly educated to university level, but they said they struggled to understand the English language. And one mother said that the midwives actually spoke under her tongue. And when I explored it with her, she said it's because the midwife didn't really dissect and break down what she was saying, so it was very hard to understand. And then the last thing was around respectfulness across cultures, and the mothers said that the midwives did show them respect. And from the interviews, it was quite clear that respect is the same across different cultures regarding being valued, being given consent, and having their views listened to. So we go on to the next slide, please. So there is a spectrum of cultural competency in midwives' views and mothers' understanding of cultural competency. And what I would say from the from the findings that midwives do attempt to be culturally competent. They are maybe thinking that the mothers didn't need it, and particularly midwife skill in assessing English proficiency. And that was another thing that came out. Next slide, please. And then one of the findings was the cultural limbo. So a gap was found between mothers and midwives regarding the exploration of culture. Midwives not asking about culture and mothers not revealing their culture was an issue and a missed opportunity, meaning that cultural needs were not explored and were missing from the plan of antenatal care. So there was a cultural limbo. Next slide, please. And dispelling cultural misconceptions, a stark finding was the misconception of the strong Black woman who was believed to be resistant to emotional and physical pain. The focus group, there was one focus group that only had Black midwives, and this was revealed in that focus group. And they raised it very strongly that this view was present in maternity services impacting the mother's care, Black mother's care. And so a new role became evident that during routine antenatal care, as well as being an educator, advocate, and professional friend, the midwife now undertakes the role as being an activist in pre-warning mothers about the risk of dying. And
Yeah. Sarah, I'm afraid I need to, I will need 10 minutes to finish this. I think your time is almost up. Yeah, this is over 40 minutes, and then I'll be ending the session in about 10 minutes. Yeah. Thank you.
That's fine. I'm on my last few slides anyway. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. So really just basically recognizing the importance of increasing cultural competency was seen from the midwives by using cultural encounters, and cultural desire was alluded to rather than being explicit. But mothers valued midwives' caring nature over the cultural knowledge. However, the first-time mothers felt that this would have been an advantage being new in the UK. And mothers did appreciate midwives who evidently had contact with other African women, as this fostered more discussion around culture. And if you go into the next slide, please. I just wanted to focus on the cultural negotiation that midwives need to undertake as another construct of cultural competency. It's needed to be in place to achieve effective care for women from diverse cultures. And there needs to be a more focused approach on discussing cultural values in routine antenatal care. And the UK Nursing and Midwifery Council Code of Professional Conduct needs to explicitly include the protection of cultural values to ensure that this is addressed in midwifery practice and education. Next slide, please. And the standards of proficiency for midwifery education need to be strengthened to ensure cultural competency is robust in midwifery education. And we need to have maternal mortality reports need to undertake a robust cultural assessment of each maternal death, because the cultural factors need to be unpicked. They really need to be looked at in great focus. And we need to have further research on women's responses, and also further research on the strong Black woman. I've talked about some limitations already around English and also only English-speaking women being included, but only 2 tribes, Yoruba and Igbo. The women were all educated at university level, which is 86%, and it's the UK average is about 68% for African Nigerian immigrants. I talked about the telephone interviews, and also I need to just talk about my bias as a Black African mother and how I use reflective journal to make sure that these biases were not impacting on my interpretation of the data. Okay, so that's my last slide coming up. Next slide, and that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, for this insightful presentation. We've learned a lot regarding your presentation. So I'll open the floor for questions and answers. If you have any question, can you put it on the chat? Write it in the chat box. Thank you so much. If you have any question, please kindly write it in the chat box. Let's start the ball rolling. I would want to ask this question. So Sarah, regarding your research, what were the insider or outsider issues during the conduct of your research?
Well, the insider perspectives was basically, I mean, I could be seen as the insider by the woman, because obviously I'm a second generation Nigerian mother, and so therefore I did use that cultural
Right. Thank you. Is there any other question from participants? Kindly feel free to ask your question. Okay. Okay, so there's no other question.
I would say that if there's any further information or if anyone wants to contact me, I am available on LinkedIn. I'm quite happy to communicate in that way. I think there's a question in the chat I'm just seeing just now. Were any of your participants scared of entering the maternity system? No, I'm not. All of them Nigerian mothers were economic migrants. They had come here to work, or they joined the husbands. Out of the 15 mothers, 13 were here with the husbands. So they had expected to face challenges, and they weren't scared of entering the maternity system. They actually thought coming to the UK, because obviously they will have other challenges. And when you're a woman fleeing war or persecution, there's going to be fear anyway when you're going to a new country. But that wasn't the case with these mothers.
Right. Thank you for your submission. There's any other question? Okay. That's someone that was saying I was particularly struck by the observation. Oh, that's from someone. Hi, Sarah. Thank you regarding the evidence on pregnancy outcomes. So the question is, somebody wants to applaud you for a great presentation. That was another tremendous submission. I was particularly struck by the observation that kindness, care, respect was more important than prior knowledge of specific cultural practices, although both would be best. This is someone's submission. Right. Thank you.
I would agree with that, because obviously the mothers said they were treated kindly and respectfully, and that was, I guess, for any woman, that is what they want when they're having a baby, to be treated with kindness and respect. And I think that will transgress any cultural differences if you're kind and respectful.